Hello and welcome back to my series on estrangement. I have some food stuck in my teeth. I should have waited. Okay, we're all good. Today I am going to be answering your questions about estrangement. I put out to my Instagram community, which you can find here, and asked them what they would like to ask me about estrangement. I asked them not to hold back, which they never usually do anyway, and said that I would answer them. This is going to be a 2, possibly 3-part, because I have had so many questions, and I'll be honest, I thought that a lot of them would just be replicated. I knew that I'd get a lot of questions, but I thought a lot of them would be the same or similar. Did not expect there to be quite so many burning questions, and I think all of them warrant answering in some fashion, so I'm going to answer as many as I can in a couple of parts. Okay, here we go. So the first question is, I've never really heard of anyone being estranged before. What does it mean for you? For me, estrangement means that I no longer have contact with my mum. So estrangement in general just means breakdown in a relationship, that you no longer have that relationship, that there's no longer that affection there for that person. It can be a friendship, it can be a spouse, it can be a child, a sibling, or it can be, in my case, parental estrangement, where I no longer have a relationship with my mum. How do extended family treat you now, and do they have opinions on your decision? I got this one in quite a few different formats, and it's one of the questions that I think is really common to ask, because most people who've dealt with estrangement in some form, or who have a slightly damaged relationship with a parent, generally have extended family who have big opinions on the whole thing, especially if you've ever dealt with a narcissistic parent or a parent who has a mental health disorder. Everybody's got big opinions around you, and as the child, quite often the onus is placed on you to repair the relationship or to keep the relationship functioning, and that's entirely unfair. So I have never had a close relationship with extended family. My mum is one of many, and I've never had a relationship particularly with any of them. I think when I was little we would spend some time together, but on a whole, I kind of know who they are, and I've never really had a close relationship with them. If I'm entirely honest, it would not surprise me if they would walk past me in the street and not recognise me. I think I would recognise most of them, or some of them, but certainly the majority I don't think would recognise me, and I can count on my hands how often I have seen them in the last 20 years. And that would usually be at big functions and things. So as far as extended family go, their opinions haven't really been placed on me, because there isn't really that relationship there anyway, and nobody has been, as of yet, bold enough to contact me and say, oh, I think you're really bad for doing this, or I think you've done this wrong. Although I'm well aware that my mum has quite a close relationship with one of her sisters, and that she will talk to her and say X, Y, Z about this, and her sister will believe her, I presume. I don't know whether her sister believes her entirely. Her sister's never seemed fit to raise it with me. So as far as external family opinions go, none have really been particularly forthcoming, and that suits me just fine. Okay, so next question, and this is another one that came up quite often. Have you explained all about estrangement to your kids, and what is their take? So I do have a video about talking to children about estrangement on my channel, which I will link up below. But yes, we talk very openly and honestly with our kids about the estrangement. It is incredibly unfortunate that mum was living with us and had been living with them with Ruben the first 9 years of his life. So it would be impossible for us not to have communicated with them what was going on, and it wouldn't have been fair on them to keep them in the dark when they were being exposed to certain things that we would have preferred they weren't. You know, they were aware of the fact that I'd asked my mum to leave, and they were aware of some of her less pleasant behaviours, and you know, some things we just couldn't protect them from 100%, which is a real shame. So I felt that we owed it to them to explain in an open, honest, but again age appropriate manner. So the children know that I don't have contact with my mum, they know why, and they know that they don't have contact with her, and they know why. I feel that it is my responsibility as a parent to protect them, and when they are old enough to protect themselves, if they choose to have contact with my mum, that is absolutely fine, a decision that I'll support them in 100%. I will not be having contact with her, and until they are able to make their own decisions, they will not be having contact with her, because it's my duty as a parent to protect their mental well-being, and I feel that she's not suitable for that and not safe for that. Her behaviours themselves spoke for themselves. So from my perspective, that is what we tell the children. Their take on it varies. Edith and Toby never really bring it up. We had a few instances when she first moved out where they would mention something about her, say it's a good memory or something, and then everybody would go quiet and sort of look at me as if to say, oh, are we upsetting mummy here? And I would say to them, hey, no, there's no shame in talking about Mormor, which is what they called her. There's no, I don't want anybody to feel guilty or bad or like you can't bring her up. It's really important that you know that you can hold those memories dear, and that you can talk about those great experiences, and that we can talk about her, and that it's not taboo, it's not shameful, it's nothing that you should feel upset about. That was important to me, because when you make something taboo, you shroud it in shame, and that's not what I'm prepared to do for them. Reuben quite often will be quite angry about some of the things that she's done and the way she's behaved, especially towards him. And you know, that's something that we talk about, and that we help, we hold space for his emotions without asking him to hold space for ours, and that's what's really important as a parent. Okay, let's have, are you happier without your mother? This is a really short, easy one to answer. Absolutely. My whole perspective on life is different, and I am a much happier, healthier, stronger person without her in my life. And that, I think in itself is really sad, but it is the truth. And you know, sometimes the truth sucks, but that is the truth. I am a much happier, healthy person without my mother in my life. How did you get over the guilt? Even though I know my parent is wrong, I still feel guilty. This one really sat with me, because I might give the impression that I'm over the guilt, but I never am. I never really am. I go to therapy. I speak to a therapist. I use this talking about my experience and sharing and reaching out to other people who've had similar experiences as a form of healing for myself. So when people say to me, oh, thank you so much, you've made me feel really validated, you've made me feel seen, and I truly appreciate your openness on the topic, that's amazing, and that's what I'm hoping for. But it's not just for other people. I do it for myself as well, because it helps me to work through things and it helps me to heal. I don't think you ever get rid of the guilt. Guilt has been a part of my life and something that I was raised to feel from birth, and I cannot imagine a life where I don't make myself feel guilty. I don't feel guilt. I don't feel like I should have done better, like I should have done something differently. But I work really hard with my therapist to move past that and to rationalise whether or not this guilt is misplaced, whether or not this guilt is right to feel. I know that I behaved in a way that was reasonable and fair when I asked my mum to leave. I should feel no guilt over that, but I do. And I think it's really hard when you've had that relationship, especially if you've been dealing with a narcissistic parent, or you've been dealing with a parent who is emotionally abusive and has taught you from a young age to feel like everything is your fault. It is incredibly difficult not to feel that way, and the only thing that I can recommend to people is therapy. And it's an ongoing therapy. It's not something that you suddenly wake up and stop feeling. I know in my logical brain that I have behaved in a way that was more than reasonable. I know in my logical brain that my childhood was emotionally abusive, and I know when I tell people things and the looks on their faces that parts of my childhood have been pretty gnarly, and yet I will still feel that guilt and that feeling that I've done something wrong. And I think that's normal in cases of estrangement and in these kind of situations, and it's reminding yourself constantly that that is not your fault. And working with a specialist, because I'm not a therapist. That's something that I always try to reiterate in these videos. I'm not a therapist, not an expert, not qualified. I'm just somebody who's been through it, who is hopefully hoping to make other people feel less alone in the experience. This next one I got in a few different varying forms. So do you worry about what happens when they die? I'm worried that I'll be racked with guilt. Worried about? No, I'm a big worrier, so that's quite a surprise for me to say. I'm not worried about it. Think about it sometimes. I'm not looking forward to that moment when I'm told and my stomach drops, because I know that will happen. I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, but I remember the shock and the feeling. But you know, ultimately I know that I could not have done anything differently other than staying in a toxic, abusive dynamic to make a difference to our relationship. And I know that this is not on me. So when she does come to pass away, I know that the estrangement is not something that I could have done any differently or something that I could have changed, and therefore I'm not prepared to accept responsibility emotionally for that choice. There are so many ways in which our relationship could have been different, and I feel like I did everything that I could to be the daughter that she wanted me to be, and nothing ever would have been enough, other than having complete control and her being completely my mum, my spouse, my sibling, my friend, everything to me, unless it was all about her and she was the primary focus in my relationships and the primary person in my life, which you're not when your kids have kids and your kids have a spouse. That's normal. But unless she could have control over those things, this relationship was never going to pan out any differently, and I can't change that. So I'm not worried that I'll be racked with guilt, because it's not my fault that things have gone the way they have. Do you have any siblings? If so, are they estranged too? I do not have any siblings. My parents had triplets before I was born, but they passed away, so I don't have any siblings. So that's not an experience that I've got anything that I can particularly add anything to, really. Do you wish you'd been able to go to therapy with your parents before to try and fix it? That's a really interesting one. No. To put it bluntly, no. I don't wish that I could have gone to therapy beforehand, because ultimately my mum was never going to change the way she behaved. It was always everybody else's fault. It was always other people should be doing things differently, and I don't think any level of therapy was going to help that. My mum in particular didn't believe in therapy, which was ironic because she trained to be a counsellor at one point when I was a child, but she would frequently say, oh, therapists are just people who are damaged, who are trying to make other people damaged, or trying to work out their own shit, and you get dragged down with them. It's all just a load of rubbish, and it wouldn't have helped. It wouldn't have made any difference. And I think what I have learned and what I have researched is, unless you're dealing with a specialist in narcissism and narcissistic parents and narcissistic behaviour, going to therapy with a narcissist can be really dicey, because they're very good at manipulating people and making you feel even more gaslighted. So I don't think it would have made any difference, and I don't feel that it would have helped anyway. So I don't wish that I'd been able to go to therapy. I would not have been able to go to therapy to make a difference with her. And if I had, I don't think that it would have had any positive effect whatsoever. So that's not something that I sort of look at and think, God, I wish we'd tried that route instead, because I don't think it would have helped. I'm estranged from my father. He's 84 and has ill health, and people keep asking me whether I will go to the funeral. I think this was asking what would I say. I think very much that when I have thought about the funeral and that kind of thing, I won't know until my mum passes away whether or not I would want to attend her funeral. But what I can say is, from the place I'm in right now, I do not see there being any positive benefit or outcome to me going to her funeral, because one, I think it's a bit of an odd question for people to ask when the person's not dead. Weird question. My mum's also had ill health, and what I can say in this position is I don't think that I would see any benefit for me, for extended family, for anyone, if I went to a funeral, because all that I can see happening would be dirty looks, aggression, a telling off from people who haven't walked in my shoes and don't know my experience and more pain. I don't need to go to a funeral of somebody to know that their behaviour was unacceptable in life and to say goodbye to them in death. I don't feel that I need that, and I don't feel that I need that closure. I often look back, my stepmother made it impossible for me to go, well, my stepmother and my mother made it impossible for me to go to my dad's funeral. He died just before I was 16, and my stepmother was really cutting about it. We didn't have a good relationship at all, spoiler. And she essentially had said none of us were welcome, but that she wouldn't stop me going, but I had to go alone, and they were right up in Scotland. I was in Yorkshire. And it was a case of, you'd have to come alone, you can't come with your mum not welcome. And at the time my mum was like, well, you can go if you want to, I'll sit in the car. And it was very difficult, and I felt like if I did go, that would be a betrayal of my mum, and I resent that. But equally, had I have gone, there would have been nothing positive to come from it, because my stepmother was a vicious woman, and there would have been nothing. Nobody would have been interested in standing up for a 15-year-old. I had technically three parents, and not one of them had the kahunas to be a decent person. So I think, having had that experience, I can say categorically now that there would have been no positive outcome, no benefit to me going to that funeral, so I don't see any benefit to me going to the next. Next question was, does your mum know or care how much you share online? No judgment. I have my mum blocked across all platforms. I've blocked numerous different accounts that she's set up across different platforms. So if my mum is aware of how much I share online or is aware of any of my content, then the only person that she has to blame for that is her, because I've revoked her access to me. And if she's chosen to find a way to create access, that's not my problem or my responsibility. So I don't know if she knows that I talk about it online. I would presume so, but I'm not particularly interested, because the only thing that I've said is truth. So not my circus, not my monkey on that one. Okay, so that's the last question that I'm going to answer this week. I have so many more questions that I'm going to answer, so as I said, there will be a part 2 next week where I'll be answering more of your questions, and if you would like to ask any more, then please do feel free to put them in the comments. And yeah, again, as always, I hope that this has been useful. A lot of the questions are asked from people who have been through or are going through an estrangement situation, and I hope that I have managed to make you feel a little bit less alone and to reassure you a bit that it's not you, and that you are not in the wrong, and that things can get better.